Let's take a look today at an idea that's been around for, well, frankly, for way too long. This idea of the harsh, judgmental God, the bad God, if you will, of the Old Testament, as opposed to the good God of the New Testament. Now let's start by taking a look at God the Son, that New Testament God. We find him in Matthew chapter 25. The nations are gathered, and it is the Son of Man, this God the Son, who is poised to judge them. And so here's Matthew 25, verse 34. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." Who are those? Those who have ministered to the least of these. Then in verse 40, and the king will answer and say to them, "Assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it for me." But what about the others? Verse 41, then he will also say to those on the left hand, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels." Those are those who were not kind to the least of these. And the final verse of the chapter, and these will go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. That's the New Testament God, the Son, Jesus Christ, consigning some, many, to eternal damnation. All right, what about the Old Testament God? We go to Genesis chapter 15. Verse 15. Now as for you, God says to Abraham, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. But God is instructing him that his descendants will go into Egypt and live there in bondage. And then he says, but in the fourth generation they shall return here. Why is it going to take so long? Remember, in this time a generation was much longer than it is now. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Now, the Amorites stand here for all those peoples who lived in Canaan, to which God would return his covenant people. But it was going to happen hundreds of years later, because the sin of the Amorite is not yet full. In other words, God is patient. The Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in mercy. That's the God of the Old Testament. What do we take from this? The God who loves is the God who judges, and the God who judges is the God who loves. Hebrews 1 tells us that the Son is the express image of the Father's person. He's the exact representation of his Father, that Old Testament God. And in John chapter 14, we hear Jesus say, the words I speak to you, I do not speak on my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does the works. There is no contradiction, and certainly no conflict between Father and Son, between Old Testament God and New Testament God, between Yahweh and Jesus Christ. They are one. We must know our triune God as one, the God of judgment and the God of love, if we are to know him at all. I'm Father Ed. Glad you joined us on the Gospel Block.